Public Safety Committee. And the reason for the meeting is it's pursuant to the motion adopted December 7th, is resuming the study and the final report of the implementation of the Merlo-Davidson Settlement Agreement. And Mr. Justice Basharash appeared before the committee, and I don't think there was any one of our members who was not shocked by what he had to say. So I'm grateful that the minister and the commissioner are able to appear. We will be going for 2 hours. We've arranged for that, but we've also arranged for a 15-minute in-camera session after the appearance of the commissioner and the minister to discuss what we've heard. And with that, I propose to ask the minister for his 7-minute presentation, followed by, I'm assuming, Commissioner Lucky, and then we'll get right into questions. The minister will leave after 1 hour, and we will continue on. And I see really no benefit in interrupting the flow of questions, so we'll just keep on moving through the questions as for round after round. So with that, Minister Blair, welcome once again to the committee. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to the committee members for the opportunity to come before you today and to speak on these very important matters. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to begin my remarks by expressing my sincere and deepest sympathies following the revelation of the remains of the 215 children that were found at a residential school in an unmarked grave in Kamloops, British Columbia. These children were taken from their parents, forced to attend a residential school, and never returned to their families. The tragic legacy of residential schools and the Government of Canada's role could not be more illustrated more profoundly than through the discovery of the children's graves. I also wanted to acknowledge the clear and unavoidable RCMP role in that tragedy. It also to acknowledge the role of the government in which we all serve. Over the past 2 years, and even today, I have spent considerable time discussing with Commissioner Lucky about the RCMP's work towards reconciliation, and the Commissioner has assured me that the RCMP will offer its full support as we seek to learn more about the events in Kamloops and to provide assistance as required in communities right across Canada. And as Canada mourns with the Kamloops, Sioux-Wet'suwet'en First Nation and all Indigenous people, I think it's very clear that we must continue to strive to improve upon the services provided to Indigenous people and communities across Canada. Thank you for allowing me to speak to that issue. I'm here today in response to the committee's study on issues surrounding Justice Bastarash's report on gender and sexual orientation-based harassment and discrimination in the RCMP. The Bastarash report highlights far too many cases of workplace harassment and sexual misconduct that has deeply affected women and LGBTQ2S members within the RCMP. We know that notwithstanding the many that were reported, many likely went unreported. And let me also state unequivocally that all Canadians deserve to feel safe from harassment and violence, and that is why our government has explicitly mandated the Commissioner of the RCMP to protect all employees, civilian and sworn, of her organization from this type of harassment and violence. After all, the women and members of the LGBTQ2S plus community who experience this harassment have had to consider whether, even if they reported it, how it would affect their career, their chances at promotion, or even their own personal safety. As soon as the report was released, I spoke with the Commissioner and emphasized that these unacceptable patterns of behavior must end, while a comprehensive plan must be implemented to address its findings and recommendations. I have also reached out and spoken at some length to Justice Bastarash to inform him of my commitment to support the Commissioner in bringing about the necessary changes, as well as overseeing the reform of the RCMP, which will be guided by his recommendations. Today, I am very encouraged to report that the implementation of many of the recommendations in the final report is well underway. I know that Commissioner Lucky will speak in greater detail to that progress and on forward priorities to address crucial issues of equality, but if I may, I'd like to highlight a few key points. First of all, a new independent Center for Harassment Resolution will begin operating later this month to help ensure impartiality and consistency in decision-making and disciplinary action. Prior to 2019, cases of sexual harassment tended to be handled entirely internally within the RCMP. This approach did not enable survivors to feel heard or believed, nor did it give rise to the belief that offenders would be held accountable. With the establishment of the ICHR through external investigators, we seek to increase trust, address concerns of retribution and bias, and ensure that appropriate discipline is taken up to and including termination of offenders. It will also work to address gaps, including consistency of decision-making, timeliness of investigations, and, in many cases, the lack of well-trained investigators, as well as a lack of follow-up, early intervention tools, and informal conflict management. The ICHR will also align with the new Canada Labour Code Workplace Harassment and Violence Prevention Regulations under Bill C-65. But unfortunately, measures alone cannot be merely after the fact. We also need to invest heavily in prevention of harassment from occurring in the first place. And to that end, a GBA Plus review is being performed on the training curriculum, in addition to a review of the paramilitary aspects of training at Depot. And this is in an effort to effect cultural change towards workplace harassment and violence within the organization, beginning at the very beginning of a member's career. In order to prevent retaliation or reoccurrence, managers and supervisors are being provided with the necessary tools and resources in order to perform workplace restoration activities and to promote greater accountability. These will be tracked in the conflict resolution plan as part of the overall case resolution process. The RCMP must effectively identify, correct, and eliminate misconduct in their ranks, and as the Commissioner will shortly explain, the RCMP will launch an external review of their conduct and disciplinary processes. Both the Commissioner and I have not been satisfied to this point with the pace of change that is expected in a modern law enforcement body. As a minister, the Canadians expect the worst behavior in the RCMP will result in serious disciplinary action on a consistent basis. That is my expectation as well. I'm also happy to report that the RCMP has launched a comprehensive equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy to address systemic barriers for diverse groups. And this will work to establish transparent and accountable practices, stronger education, awareness and training regimes, and the foundations for cultural change within the RCMP. I also know that Commissioner Lucky will describe how the RCMP is modernizing their recruitment and onboarding processes, including introducing new tools to assess character and to detect bias. We have a duty, all of us, to do the necessary work to prevent harassment and discrimination from ever occurring again. Women and members of the LGBTQS2 community must feel safe in coming forward to report all forms of harassment, and they must know that they will be heard, believed, and supported. These difficult calls must be met with a transparent investigation with tangible consequences for those responsible, while actively supporting for survivors who have the courage to speak out. We know that we have to work hard to change a culture that persists not only in the RCMP, but throughout all policing and paramilitary organizations. The Commissioner shares my conviction that that culture must evolve and it must change. I will support her throughout to address root causes and modernize her training as we work to prevent the unacceptable incidents behavior outlined in the Bass Fresh report from ever occurring again. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to your opportunity to answer the questions of committee members.
Thank you, Minister Blair. Commissioner Lucky, do you have a statement that you wish to start with?
Yes, I do. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And members of the committee. Monsieur le Président et membres du comité, bonjour. Thank you for the invitation to speak on these important issues raised in the final report of the independent assessor. I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you on the unceded Algonquin territory. Later today with me is, I will have Gail Johnson, our Chief Human Resource Officer, Kevin Stringer, our Chief Administrative Officer, and Nadine Huggins, our Executive Director for HR Policies and Strategies and Programs. And we are all excited to speak to you today about the progress we're making at the RCMP. The independent assessor's report was hard to read for many, including me. But I am so grateful to Justice Bastarash and his team and to the women who came forward despite the pain it caused. And as a woman with 34 years experience in the RCMP, I come to this role with a lot of firsthand experience. J'ai été témoin de bien des changements et je sais que le travail n'est pas terminé.
I have been witness to a number of changes and see the road ahead is a lot to do. I'm privileged to be part of this moving forward.
Second, Commissioner, we're getting some sort of background noise, but I'm not quite sure what the background noise is. Okay, well, if you could continue, we'll see whether the background noise continues. Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. As Justice Bastarache said in his report, this is
Ainsi que le juge Bastarache le souligne dans son rapport, il s'agit d'une mission de longue haleine qui nécessite une vision.
I think we're getting it. It's in the
translation.
Yeah, the interpretation is going on. Can I get the clerk to intervene here?
We are looking into it, Mr. Chair, right now.
Okay, I think that we are looking into it right now. I think that's what I heard. Okay,
keep trying.
we'll give it one more go, and
Okay.
if not, we'll suspend for a minute or two till we get it organized. So I apologize once again. Please
Would you
start.
like me to continue?
Please continue.
Yes. Okay. Like I said, as Justice Bastarache said in his report, this is a long-term endeavor that requires vision, leadership, and determination over a decade or more. So this means taking strong action now to set the foundation to support long-term change, and that's exactly what we're doing. I was given a mandate to modernize the organization and its culture. So preventing harassment and bad behavior of all kinds means establishing the foundation to first attract and retain the right people, because we have a healthy workplace that is barrier-free. We need to support our employees to deal with workplace issues at the earliest point and create a culture where people are not afraid to speak up. This will not be accomplished by checking a box on the latest report. We need to challenge our norms. We need to be creative. We need to be open. We need to listen to the people most affected, build relationships of trust, and stay focused on the long term. Since I took the chair, we have set a more holistic path forward. My goal is to ensure that no matter who sits in this chair, change will continue because we've set up the right foundation. So we focused on 4 areas: accountable governance, inclusive leadership, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and trusted resolution mechanisms. By staying the course, we have already moved the yardsticks on many of the themes identified in this report. And I won't get into a long laundry list, but I do want to focus on what I sincerely believe to be the most significant areas of change. First, we have improved the diversity at the top. It's both symbolic and its real impact. Not only can diverse people see themselves in our most senior leaders, but our decision-making is much better. My senior executive team is more diverse and more balanced, whether it be gender, civilian, and other forms of diversity. More than 50% of our commanding officers are female, as an example. And it has improved the discussions that we have and changed how we approach issues in the RCMP. We're also working with our External Management Advisory Board, which brings even more expertise and diversity. Second, we have worked hard to develop a new model to deal with harassment complaints. And I'm glad to say that the Independent Center for Harassment Resolution will be launched by June 30th, 2021. It's in line with the recommendations. It's outside the chain of command and uses external investigators to ensure it is trusted and unbiased. We believe that this will improve trust and give people the confidence to speak out. The center is also focused on prevention, so providing informal conflict management tools to deal with things at the lowest level and to analyze what works to prevent such behavior. But we have more to do, and we will soon launch an external review of our conduct process and disciplinary measures to make sure our sanctions are effective and in line with modern expectations. Third, we have new tools to detect and eliminate systemic discrimination. Gender-based analysis is an approach we've rolled out across our organization, starting in our senior decision-making. It gives us that lens that we need to identify barriers faced by women and diverse groups and to see things in a different way. GBA Plus has led to many specific but meaningful changes, such as our uniforms are more inclusive, our promotion process more equitable, our awards and recognition policies now recognize leave without pay for parental leave when counting years of service. And we've removed barriers in our recruitment process for our northern applicants. And these are just a few examples, but together they really do amount to a lot. And we've also recently launched the first ever RCMP Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Strategy to guide and measure improvements across the RCMP. Fourth, we have made a commitment to a modern recruitment process, and we are taking the time to get it right. It starts up, obviously, with figuring out who we're trying to attract in 2021. Times have changed, and so have expectations. The role of a police officer is complex, and we know it requires a wide range of skills. And so we've worked with external experts to define the attributes and characteristics needed for modern policing. We're identifying new tools to assess the characteristics we're looking for, including to screen for things like racist and sexist beliefs, which has been brought up by this committee on a previous session. Nous avons révisé nos stratégies de...
We've revised our recruitment facilities to make sure that we get the quality that we're searching for. We will continue to review each element of the process so that we have it modernized and proper approach.
Leaders. Leadership and the tone on the top is one of my biggest priorities. Having a more diverse set of leaders around me has been so important. And we have started to implement a leader character approach to our leadership development and training. In the past, we've done a good job at measuring and developing operational skills, but now we need to do the same to help us assess and develop overall character and good judgment. And we think leader character model will be a game changer in ensuring we have the right people doing the right job. It's an approach we want to integrate from the start with applicants and continue to build throughout our employees' careers. Pour moi, le GRC doit attirer des gens remarquables.
I believe that the RCMP has to attract people in the workplace and have an inclusive workplace. This is the key to excellence for our organization.
Just a few examples of where we've implemented real changes, and I feel and I see the changes every day. I also acknowledge that there's still key issues to address in our organization and in our society as a whole to achieve equity. The independent assessor touched on a few, like better support for parents, which is important to women's participation in the workforce and in any sector. Our vast geography, however, creates even bigger challenges, and it can be hard to find the supports and the resources we need to fully support our employees. We need to have creative solutions, which are not always about more resources, but finding new ways of doing things. For example, we look at different service delivery models that will benefit both communities and our employees, like the fly-in models we use in some northern jurisdictions. I don't have the full set of solutions here today, but I do know that we won't achieve equity unless we work together and address these larger issues. I am so committed to continue to advance change and modernization, as is my entire senior executive team. And I'm committed to listening to the people most affected and continuing to expand that circle. And I'm committed to partnering with others to explore what we can do to address these issues. So I do truly welcome your comments, ideas, and suggestions. Your expertise and influence is what will allow my team to find solutions. So I look forward to your discussion today. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Commissioner Lucky. With that, we go to our first round of 6 minutes each. Mr. Motts, Madame Guerra, Madame LaRouche, and Mr. Harris. In that order, Mr. Motts, 6 minutes, please. You're on mute, Glenn.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and Minister, for being here today. My first question, Minister, you and I share a similar history in that both of the leaderships of the municipal police services that you and I each served in answered to and had a governing body, a police services board or a police commission attached to it. In November, when this report came out, you had said that good policing starts with good governance, and I couldn't agree with you more. So where are you at in that process of implementing good governance within the RCMP?
Minister Blair, you're on mute.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Motts. And I stand by that comment. And I agree. In both of our experience, you know, we have experienced in municipal policing, of course, a different governance model. I will tell you that there are ongoing discussions, first of all, with respect to Indigenous policing. And I'm sure you're aware that we are undertaking a process of co-production of the new legislative framework for Indigenous policing. At the heart of that discussion and that new legislative framework will be a new governance model for policing in First Nations. There's also ongoing discussions with the contract policing jurisdictions, our provincial territories. A number of those areas are already looking at their own Police Services Act, and there are ongoing discussions among us with respect to new approaches to governance within the RCMP. But one of the things that we've heard very clearly that I think speaks to some of the things we've spoken about earlier today is the need for an independent and external review of complaints, but also the new harassment resolution process that we announced.
Well, Minister, thank you. That kind of leads me to my next question. More specifically, Bill, like in the report, Justice Basharas stated that necessary reform within the RCMP itself will not take place without external pressure. And you have said that you have already started an external review of the RCMP, and that you would have more to say, quote, in the coming weeks. That was 7 months ago, back in November. Excuse me. Now, specifically, is there anything that you have done, in the meantime, to start this investigative external review, and what does that look like?
Yeah, the very first area that we began looking at, and it was in direct response to the Bastarash report, was the establishment of an external review process for complaints of harassment resolution. And so we've been working very closely with the RCMP in the development of the ICHR. That's a $32 million investment, $8 million ongoing in the establishment of new external processes and independent determination of these measures. It was, I think, the most critical area that needed to be addressed. We also had to come into compliance with Section 65, Bill 65 of the Labor Code. And so we have placed a priority upon that, but there's ongoing work, as the Commissioner outlined.
Minister, I got a couple of questions more that I want to cover off, and I thank you for that answer. And I'm just wondering if you were able to table some of the documents and consultations you've had and the progress you've made from your ministry and the RCMP with regards to that external review. That would be great. The other question that I have, Minister, is in relation to many of the allegations within the Bastarash report indicate very clearly that there was significant criminality that occurred by members of the RCMP against other members of the RCMP. Now, so my question to you, sir, have you ensured that criminal investigations have been initiated, or encouraged those investigations to be initiated against members of the RCMP who've committed these offenses as highlighted by the Bastarash report? And I guess more specifically, well, let's leave it there and let you answer that one first.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Mott. And this was an issue that I raised directly with Justice Bastarash because of those very serious allegations that he did not particularize in his report, naming individuals, and out of respect for the victims. And as you can imagine, those criminal investigations do require that we respect the wishes of the victims in those cases. But let me also acknowledge to Glenn, I've had a number of discussions with Chief Justice Bastarash as well about the inadequate response in the disciplinary processes to deal with what are clearly egregious behaviors unacceptable within the RCMP. And I think it does highlight the need for more effective and responsive disciplinary process, up to and including criminal investigations and charges where appropriate. Right. It's also critically important in these matters to respect the wishes of the victims as these matters are resolved. But certainly those behaviors are totally unacceptable and require a very strong response, up to and including dismissal and criminal prosecution.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And, I think I only have about a minute left.
30 seconds left.
So Justice Basharas discovered in his report, and he reported that many of the worst offenders within the RCMP, in the terms of the misconducts, were promoted individuals. And he also went on to list there's 15 serial offenders that he described them, who are senior officers. I guess it begs the question, how many of them still remain active within the RCMP? And what direction have you given to ensure that those predators are removed from their posts?
And I don't believe that anyone who engages in these behaviors has the right to wear the uniform of the RCMP, and that they need to be dealt with more effectively. It is, of course, the responsibility of the disciplinary process of the commissioner, but we've had a number of discussions about bringing greater rigor to that disciplinary process, and perhaps given more time, she could give you an explanation of the work that she's doing in that regard.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. Now, Mr. Motz asked for documents, and I didn't hear an undertaking to table documents.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, if I was remiss in that, I was cognizant of my limited time, and I would ask that those be tabled to the committee.
Okay, thank you. With that, Mr. Fisher, you have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here, and thank you, Minister. Bill, thank you very much for being here and providing this level of testimony to our committee. Minister, I'm pretty sure I heard you say in your remarks that efforts were underway to address the paramilitary efforts within the RCMP. Now, I'm new to this committee, and I'm, finding that the other members of this committee certainly have an awful lot more background on this report. But to me, the idea of tearing somebody down to rebuild them in a way that you want them is kind of archaic, and I can't imagine it not leading to major issues down the road. So when my colleagues were studying this report, they heard from many witnesses and experts about the need to address this. And I wonder if you could speak to the committee today about this paramilitary structure that you and the RCMP will be addressing.
Yeah, thanks very much, Darren. It's a really important issue, not just for the RCMP, but for all police organizations right across the country. And I think the RCMP recognizes that in a modern police service, they've got to address sort of the entire merit criteria that they apply in hiring people. I believe that the RCMP recruit outstanding people to their organization, but it's important that we look at the recruitment, the training, and the deployment of the members to ensure that the culture is more welcoming to diverse people and to women in the organization. And I think that's critically important, and that is the work that is undergoing in the RCMP. The commissioner and we talked about the diversity and inclusion strategy that they are implementing, and one of the things I wanted to highlight for the committee. We actually recruited the commissioner because of what we believe to be her outstanding ability to bring about change in the organization. But let me acknowledge, as I've done this in another police service, it's a very difficult challenge. But we've given the commissioner a very explicit mandate, and she's been working tirelessly. It really begins with leadership, as she's already indicated, and she's made significant changes within the leadership of the RCMP, and I think sent a very strong signal about the importance of diversity and inclusion, a diversity of perspectives in policing. It is going to result and necessitate, as Justice Bastarache indicated, a significant reform of police culture, which he referred to as a toxic culture. That reform is well underway under the leadership of the commissioner, and I believe it's our government's responsibility and all Canadians' responsibility to support the RCMP as they go about those important changes in addressing that culture that Justice Bastarache expressed very understandable concerns about. But the commissioner has been working tirelessly with her entire team. Change is steady, but slow, and we want to continue to work hard on it and continue to accelerate that work.
Thanks very much, Bill, and that kind of segues perfectly with my next question for the commissioner. The report, as you said, Bill, does make it very clear that the culture within the RCMP is described as toxic and that external forces are needed to address this serious problem. And I know this means an awful lot to the people back home in my riding in Dartmouth-Cole Harbour, and people all across Canada care very much about this issue. So I would ask the commissioner, what concrete action are you taking to address this? And Mr. Motz might have touched on this earlier with a question to Bill, but is the RCMP consulting with any external bodies to address this concern, Commissioner?
Thank you so much for that question. As the minister alluded to, I was given a strict mandate to modernize the RCMP and to transform its culture. And so we've been engaging with numerous external and independent bodies and individuals to address issues around workplace culture. Of note, first of all, we have the RCMP Management Advisory Board, which was established by the government in 2019, and they are there to provide an external advisory function to myself on the management and administration of the RCMP, and it was given a specific responsibility to provide guidance and advice on workplace culture, and that's the very issue that Justice Bastarache outlines in his report. And since its establishment, the board has challenged the RCMP's thinking and provided thoughtful advice and guidance on a number of a number of areas. And most importantly, it's been instrumental in the development of the Independent Center for Harassment Resolution, and they had a specific task force just for that. There's several initiatives that I've launched in the past 3 years that have brought culture and management modernization, and we've been engaging groups and individuals and experts, including the Association of Black Law Enforcers. I have a Commissioner's Diversity Advisory Committee. I have a National Indigenous Advisory Committee. I have a Lived Experience Indigenous Committee. I have the Government of Canada Joint Employment Equity Committee, serving with Pride Group, Federal Black Employees Caucus, the Women's Executive Network. And so with that, there's been a lot of consultation, and the EDI strategy provides that clear structure for the concrete actions underway to address racism and discrimination and to promote that inclusion in the RCMP workforce, and how the organization will provide service to the communities. So we're trying to hit as many people that are impacted by the decisions we make, so that our decisions are better decisions and more in tune with those people.
Any time left, Mr. Chair?
Go at 20 seconds.
Okay, modern recruitment processes, Commissioner. You talked about that. I'm interested just in a short period of time if you can outline maybe a couple new ways of detecting bias.
Well, we brought in a screening process whereby we can, in fact, screen for discrimination and racist behaviors. So it's exciting because before what we did was we'd look at some of the skills and experience, but now we're looking at character, and we're looking at the implicit bias test in that. So stay tuned.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Madame LaRouche, bienvenue au comité. Encore 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the Minister for being here today, as well as Commissioner Luque for very interesting opening comments. We're quite saddened, in fact, that we're in 2021 and we still have so much work to do to overcome toxic masculinity and toxic environments. We can see that this culture, unfortunately, the Bastarache report was quite clear about it, it continues in the RCMP. Mr. Minister, in your opening remarks, you said that you regret that the RCMP, despite all the efforts that have been made to date, are not quite as modern or as modernized as you wish it would be. Could you expand on that? How could the RCMP be more modern? How would you define it? What do you mean by that?
Madame LaRouche, and I think it's a very important question. Listen, the RCMP is iconic in Canada, well respected around the world, but we have seen incidents. The Bastarache report, I think, revealed to us very clearly that there are elements of the work environment within the RCMP which are not as supportive and welcoming as they need to be for women in the organization, for diverse people in the organization. And I think that the commissioner has been engaged in, I think, some very positive work in this regard, but I wanted to acknowledge there's a great deal of work that still needs to be done. We see it as well in our relationship, and it's something we're very much seized with. And recent events, I think, have brought it home for all of us. The relationship between the RCMP and diverse people, and particularly Indigenous people in this country, is troubled by a long and difficult history between the RCMP and Indigenous people in Canada. And notwithstanding that there's a great deal of progress that has been made, there remains a great deal of work to do. And I think it's important on the principles of reconciliation, but also there's nothing more important than in the relationship between the police and the public they are sworn to serve and protect than trust. And earning the trust of the people that you serve is work that needs to be done every single day, and it can be lost in a single unfortunate incident or an individual's inappropriate conduct. And so I know the commissioner remains very strongly focused on being worthy of Canadians' trust. And we recognize that in a large paramilitary organization, there needs to be continuous progress towards reform. And that includes bringing in a greater diversity of perspective within the RCMP, people with different lived experience, women, Indigenous people, people from racialized communities. That diversity of perspective will help that organization progress. The RCMP and the commissioner recognize that, but they've got lots of work to do through recruitment, through training, and for how we treat the people within the organization. I think, as I've already mentioned to Mr. Motz, I also think that police services must be accountable, transparently accountable to the people they serve, and that's why we're also working on improving the governance structure for policing in the RCMP, but right across the country.
Oui, et Monsieur le Ministre, aussi d'ailleurs, vous avez bien fait de commencer.
Yes, and of course, you began by offering your regrets for the 215 victims in Kamloops. I participated in the debate last night, and we have a lot of empathy and sympathy for the families and their survivors. You also spoke of diversity and regaining the trust in the RCMP. One of the important recommendations, you mentioned it, is that of an independent or external center. You said $32 million for the creation of this organization. What has become of this major recommendation for independent third party?
Thank you very much, Madame LaRouche. And this is also a very important question. The ICHR, which was what was recommended, is being introduced on June 30th. It will actually launch. The RCMP have been working very hard in doing a number of things. The ICHR is going to focus on prevention, including awareness and education campaigns. It's going to provide access to training for supervisors. And it is intended to increase trust and address concerns within for among the members of the RCMP with a new model, which will be independent and outside of the chain of command. It's going to use external investigators, and so we're developing a roster of expert investigators from outside the RCMP that will conduct the investigations, reach conclusions, provide recommendations to restore the workplace. And I believe that the external nature of this and using people outside of the chain of command will be able to provide assurance to survivors of harassment within the workplace that their complaints will be taken very seriously, that they will be believed and supported, and that there will be no repercussion or retribution for bringing harassment complaints forward. I think it's a very important innovation, but it also requires a significant investment in prevention, not just in response to harassment when it occurs in the workplace.
20 seconds.
En fait, donc, si je comprends bien,
So if I understood clearly, it's coming, but perhaps we could hear from Commissioner Lucky. What do you mean by an independent? What does this look like from your perspective?
Unfortunately, we're going to have to hold that question because Benevolent Rouge is out of time. Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start my timer so that I'll know when I'm using up all of my time. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for joining us. I know your colleague from Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, called you Bill, and I'm happy to do that in private and socially. But since you're here in your official capacity as Minister of the Crown, I will call you as Minister because we are looking to you as the person responsible to speak on behalf of the government and respond to the serious circumstances that we're dealing with. In response to your question from my colleague from the bloc, you said that Mr. Justice Bastarash found that the RCMP was not as supportive as they needed to be towards women. I would perhaps call that the understatement of the year, but the year is very young. But the committee's response to Mr. Bastarash was quite different than that. And in fact, he said not this about the RCMP, that the workplace was included systemic patterns of discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, race, including workplace structures that were characterized, cultures, a toxic culture characterized by misogyny, homophobia, and racism, and interpersonal violence, including sexual violence, and said that the women were and LGBTQS people were interfered, they were prevented from receiving promotions, training, work assignments on an equal basis with other applicants, and had retribution exacted for attempts to bring forward complaints. That is not exactly the kind of characterization that you gave it. And he went further, and I want you to address this particular point. He did say that he was not confident, and I think the committee members were struck by the force of that comment, that he had no confidence that the change could take place inside the institution itself, that he had no confidence that there was no way forward without some forward of sustained, independent, and external pressure. And I want to suggest to you that shouldn't be coming from members of parliament and parliamentary committees. This ought to come from a structure of governance, which you mentioned in relation to the contract policing for the RCMP, But what about the RCMP itself? What about an independent oversight board, such as civilian police forces across the country are governed by? Would you be supportive of that as a way of ensuring that there was a sustained, ongoing, independent external pressure to seek the changes that are necessary?
Mr. Harris, before Minister Blair responds, if you could raise your microphone, the interpreters are having some considerable difficulty hearing you. So, Minister Blair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Harris. And first of all, let me be very clear. I did not intend in any way to minimize what I believe to be the egregious and totally unacceptable behavior that women and LGBTQ members of the RCMP were subjected to, as highlighted in the Bastarache report. Those behaviors are completely unacceptable. If I failed to describe them as and denounce them as clearly as they needed to be, let me please correct that now. Because they are completely unacceptable. I have also discussed with Justice Bastarache about the need for an external oversight and governance of the RCMP, and I think it's a very important element of public trust that there be sound governance. We're certainly working towards that now with a new legislative framework for Indigenous policing that will enable us to address the issues of governance for that aspect of service delivered for the RCMP. There are a number of other aspects I would highlight for you. For example, we have and are continuing to work with the Complaints Review Commission established by our government with respect to the RCMP. I think that there are significant enhancements that need to be done, and I'll be bringing forward legislation to enhance, to bring forward those enhancements of the Complaints Reviews process.
If I may interrupt with that, yes, we would like to see that. We didn't see it in the last iteration of legislation that was brought before prorogation. But let me ask you this. You've also made reference to the ICHR, which you described as an independent center for harassment resolution, and that sounded to me, with your prevention and goals, education and training goals, more like a kind of thing that I was involved in as a dispute resolution, mediation kinds of things, as opposed to, in fact, making sure that people who are guilty of serious sexual harassment, including instances of rape, for example, the commissioner, the former Justice Bastarache identified 131 cases that he was aware of that qualified as that. What has been done to ensure that people who have actually committed serious criminal offenses in the course of their interactions with other members of the RCMP were actually brought to justice? What has been done to follow up on that identified problem, as opposed to dispute resolution, but in fact root out and make sure that those people who are responsible are actually held accountable?
Mr. Harris, anyone who engages in those behaviors should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law and should be in jail. And in my opinion, has no right to be a police officer. The government of Canada does not conduct criminal investigations, but I believe that where there is evidence and again, one has to respect the wishes of the survivors of these activities or actions in how we proceed. But I am absolutely supportive of holding individuals who engaged in those clearly criminal behaviors to the full account of the law. They should be brought to justice. Again, the government doesn't conduct criminal investigations, but I'm very supportive of those individuals being dealt with appropriately.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. That moves us to our second round. We commence our second 5-minute round with Madame Stubbs, Madame Demoff, Madame LaRouche, Mr. Harris, Mr. Van Popta, and a Liberal to be named later. So, Madame Stubbs, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just following up, I guess, on my question.
You're on mute, Shannon. Shannon, you.
Sorry, I've got serious rural internet connection issues today. Thank you, Chair. So just to follow up on a point that Mr. Motz had made, and then that Mr. Harris was ending on. Minister, can I just get some clarity here? Rather than sort of repeating our shared outrage about these issues, can you just offer some very specifics about the consequences? So, are you saying that of the 3,000 complaints, of the 131 legitimate cases, of the 15 serial perpetrators and repeat offenders, not one single criminal charge has been laid, and you aren't doing anything about it?
And Ms. Stubbs, I'm not a police officer anymore. The responsibility for conducting criminal investigations and disciplinary investigations resides with the commissioner. So that's a question perhaps better directed towards her.
But let's start with you, though, as the minister accountable to Canadians. So what are you going to do about it?
I've been working very closely with the RCMP in bringing about reform with respect to the complaints resolution process. With respect to complaints resolution, we are working with the RCMP to support the changes that we've asked the commissioner and directed the commissioner to make in her mandate, and providing her with the support and the resources that she requires in order to do that.
So you can understand that this seems a little bit curious, and Canadians would be looking to you for leadership, especially given that yours is a government where the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers have shown a certain propensity for having no problem with actually getting involved in the decisions of public prosecutions. But we'll just let your answer stand as it is. So you've mentioned this independent review body being launched on June 30th. First of all, I would note that when Justice Bastarache was here at the committee, which was already 1 month after his report had been made public, and it was 7 months ago, he hadn't yet spoken to you. So I'm glad to hear, as you said in your opening remarks, that somehow you've managed to make that happen in the last 7 months. I would note he did say he had spoken to Commissioner Lucky already, and he said, quote, "She recognized there had been a lack of leadership, told me of her willingness to address all of these issues and how she was trying to set up a stronger support for herself in the central administration and in supervision. In that sense, there was a better understanding, I think, within the RCMP of what has to be done." So just for clarity, that's what Justice Bastarache said about the RCMP response to the report when you had not yet spoken to him. Can you confirm what you will do then to ensure that there is a review, action taken, and consequences by either the new body that is being set up or somebody for the 3,000 complaints, 131 legitimate cases, and 15 repeat offenders?
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, the government did provide $32 million in funding to establish the ICHR. I've also consulted with the Labour Ministry with respect to compliance to align with Canadian Labour Code workplace harassment and violence prevention regulations. That is one of my responsibilities. We did bring forward with that budget, Ms. Stubbs. You may recall voting against it, but in fact, we did provide them with the resources necessary to do that. We're continuing to work, and I've had a number of discussions with the commissioner about how to ensure that the ICHR is truly a fully external body.
Okay, I'll ask the commissioner.
There's some additional work
Thanks,
to be done.
Minister. I'll ask the commissioner about that later. I have another question for you. I just want to quote from Bastarache's report on page 48. Of note are the assaults that took place at the hands of 2 RCMP doctors. Vulnerable women applying to the RCMP, their dream career, were subjected to prostate rectal exams. Their breasts were felt in a lingering and unprofessional manner. They were subjected to unnecessary and gratuitous vaginal exams. Nurses were not present. The assessors were told that some members were aware of the conduct of these doctors and warned applicants about the doctors, but that nothing was done to discipline them or to protect the vulnerable young women who were forced to endure these medical examinations. When I asked Justice Bastarache about that at committee, he said that these doctors were not a part of the scope of the report. And he was told, quote, told by government people that they're going to set up another process like mine for the victims of the 2 doctors. So can you tell me what initiative you have taken to set up and update us on the status of that new process that you've created per Justice Bastarache's recommendations to deal with the women who were violated by the doctors?
Yes, and I'm pleased to be able to advise you that we've recently agreed with the RCMP to certify a class action related to women and men who were sexually assaulted during their medical examinations and were not covered under the Merlo-Davidson settlement. The matter is taken very seriously. We are looking at all next steps, but we are certifying that class action, and as was done with the Merlo-Davidson settlement. But these matters, as Justice Bastarache indicated, were not covered in that. So we are addressing them through that secondary process.
Thank you. Specifically, what would be the timeline on that?
We certified the class action, and as you're aware, those things do take some time.
Yeah.
but as well, the RCMP have been informed of this issue with respect to Justice Bastara's report, and I'm sure the commissioner can inform you about what steps they are taking to ensure that there's no continuation of this totally unacceptable situation. And for those who are victims of that behavior in the past, we've certified it a class action in order to deal with that appropriately.
Thank you.
I'm
assuming I'm done.
You did very well on the time.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Madam Sabza, that's entirely my fault.
Chair, just before we
yes,
go to my
Madame Dema.
questions, I just have a point of order, and I don't know if my Conservative colleague knew that she was doing it when she was, but I suspect there are a number of women watching these proceedings right now, and by reading those comments from the Bastarache report, and I know they're public record, and we all agree that they're shocking, but it can also be very triggering for women who have survived sexual assault. So I just would ask all members to be very careful as to what they're reading out loud or in the way that they ask the questions, to be mindful that we probably do have women watching these proceedings who did experiencing that and may find it triggering. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, member. Caution. Yeah, I'll just respond actually. Thank you, member, to my colleague for her point. Indeed, it is in a public report. It is important that we talk about specifics and names things when they happen. And also, I would suggest to my colleague, she shouldn't assume that every one of her colleagues on the committee right now in this meeting don't know intimately exactly what that's like. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we can settle that point of caution. I don't necessarily regard it as a point of order. Now, with that, I have a conflict here. Is it Madame Demop or Madame Lambropoulos next?
That's me next, Chair.
Okay, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner Lucky, you shared a quote with me by Kwame Christian, and it was, "The best things in life are on the other side of a difficult conversation. If we can have the conversation in a better way, we can make meaningful change in the world around us." And I don't know that we could be having a more difficult conversation than we are following the Bastarache report. I applaud the work that you've done and the changes in the senior ranks and the independent Center for Harassment Resolution. I guess my concern is with the rank and file commissioner. I just read an article on CBC that the RCMP has lost 100 Indigenous officers over the last 3 years, and there are questions of racism. I read Janet Merlot's book, and much of the harassment that she received when she reported, I would call them microaggressions. And how can you ensure that the rank and file of the RCMP are moving along with you? Because the changes you've made are important, but when we read about these things and we hear about these things, you need to ensure that the rank and file is moving with you. So I just wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes, thank you for that question. First and foremost, it's all about, of course, within the rank and file, part of our initiatives are involving training. And so we have brought in the cultural awareness and humility course. We've brought in trauma-informed approaches to victims, anti-racism training, which is interesting with the anti-racism training is that the only reason we haven't rolled it out is because it's being done by people, Canadians who have been impacted by racism. And so we want to make sure that this is very, very powerful training. So that's part of it, training. Then, of course, we've rolled out our equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy. So that's part of my mandate and the objective to change the culture and transform the RCMP. So there's been a lot of activities under that umbrella. We have to make sure, though, that when things happen in the RCMP and people aren't acting in accordance with our core values, that they will, in fact, be held accountable. The interesting thing about core values is we're actually reviewing those core values and we're reviewing our core mission statement, and they're actually building that from the bottom up instead of the top down. So there's actually these massive consultation sessions with various employees from all rank and file so that they will be part of this. And it's interesting. I didn't think that, we would actually make change, but when I see some of the emails that I get, for example, I see that, they're talking about Vision 150. They're quoting some of the things that we're doing. I spoke myself to Linda Davidson, and as she's reached out to me, I've reached out to her on several instances. And one of the recent ones was in regards to the Independent Center for Harassment. And I was so happy to hear her comments. We let her review the policy from start to finish and all the parts that are included in that. And she was very pleased with the progress, felt that it was giving justice to things that weren't there for the RCMP. So that to me tells me that we're doing something right. I see it in the tones of the emails. I see it in behaviors, but I think the statistics, once we start looking at it, we're not looking at it as far as the statistics right now. We're in the building those foundations so that, like I said in my opening remarks, when I come and go, there's nothing worse than having something, I'll do something, and as soon as I leave, it's gone. No, it's all about the foundation and building that strong so that the next person can continue.
I'm going to stop you there because I also have a quick question for the minister. I'm pretty sure that Glenn Motz would agree with this, but why is it important, Minister, for parliamentarians and ministers of the Crown not to be involved in criminal investigations?
Yeah, actually, it's a founding principle of the RCMP and of government that and as a police officer myself for 39 years, no politician, no government should interfere with determining who should be investigated or what the outcome of those investigations are. It was a rather interesting question put to me. So I spent 39 years of my life conducting criminal investigations, but it's absolutely not my responsibility. And I'm very respectful of. I have ministerial responsibility and oversight of the RCMP, but I do not direct the commissioner or the RCMP in their operations. And in particular, I do not direct criminal investigations or the outcome of those investigations. That is entirely the independent responsibility of the RCMP. It's a fundamental principle of Canadian law.
Thank you, Madame Demo. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and the minister is scheduled to leave in a few minutes. I think the way we'll do this is that Madame LaRouche will do 2.5 minutes, Mr. Harris will do 2.5 minutes, and then the minister can excuse himself and we'll continue on with the commissioner. Madame LaRouche, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Minister, I'd like to return to a comment you've made earlier. We know that it's been over 30 years that it was requested many times for change within the RCMP, that there is a organizational culture problem. And you did mention that, yes, changes have occurred, progress has been made, but that they were very slow. What could we do to pick up the pace to ensure that we achieve more success or more progress more quickly? Do we need to put in more money? Is it a matter of political will? What's missing to get things to launch?
Madame LaRouche, I think one of the most important elements of your question is about leadership. And it's one of the reasons we selected Commissioner Lucky to lead as the first woman commissioner of the RCMP. And Commissioner Lucky, I believe, has been doing some excellent work in bringing out a significant change at the top of her organization. And it is far more reflective. And I would also point out, for example, some of the things that Justice Bastarache identified with respect, for example, maternity and parental leave within the RCMP. Those are things that, quite frankly, that traditional iconic organization, which is the RCMP, has been perhaps not as quick and adaptable as they need to be, ensuring meaningful work for women who are expecting children, providing sufficient human resource funding, backfilling positions, and there's a number of very significant things that the RCMP can to create a more welcoming environment. The commissioner is very much seized with modifications through the equity, inclusion, and diversity strategy to bring about changes in their recruitment, changes in their training, and significant changes in the work environment, all of which I believe will be necessary and supportive of the diversity that the RCMP seeks.
2 seconds. I think we'll probably go to Mr. Harris for a final 2.5 minutes.
OK, ben à ce moment-là, ben, ça-
Well, I have a very quick question I'd like to ask for Commissioner Lucky, but I'll save it for later. Thank you.
Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Minister, you referred to the RCMP as an iconic force. Indeed, it is. It's over 150 years old. It was a colonial force, in fact, a tool of colonialism in Canada, and it's also a paramilitary force with training that goes with that. Do you think it's time for that to be changed, and that we not have what's been described to our committee as, you know, a process which strips down the individual and then builds them back up again in the mold of the RCMP? Isn't that something that should be tossed away with the colonial attitude that was present at the time of the incorporation of the force, and we should turn to a police service model? Would the minister agree with that?
Actually, Mr. Harris, I very much agree with that. You know, there's one of the founding principles of policing is that the police are the public and the public are the police. And the police truly do have to reflect, you know, the values and the diversity of the people that they are sworn to serve and protect. And I think it's that type of reform, that type of evolution has been an important thing for all policing right across the country. And it's particularly important for such an iconic tradition-bound organization such as the RCMP. There is very much, I think, for Canadians to be proud of, but the RCMP itself has to continue to evolve and to become more reflective and frankly, more open. And I believe that engaging more fulsomely with the people that they're sworn to serve and protect.
Minister, if you agree with that, what do you think needs to happen to get rid of that paramilitary mindset and bring about changes from the very start of recruitment in the RCMP? What needs to happen? What will you do?
I'd invite you to discuss with the commissioner in the next round some of the reforms she's bringing about at Depot, and where you know much of the emphasis at one point in time was placed upon marching and that compliance with that paramilitary structure and those traditions. But I think it's evolving quite significantly to become far more inclusive, far more diverse, far more open to working within communities. I've watched policing evolve significantly, Mr. Harris, over the past 40 years. You know, there's still progress that needs to be made, but I believe that the commissioner is very much engaged with her senior management team in bringing about those changes in recruitment, in training, and in the way services are being delivered. A big part of that is working with the people that are policed by the RCMP, including in Indigenous communities, to ensure that police services are delivered in their communities, which is respectful of the way in which they wish to be policed, and really develops that relationship that I spoke of that is so important between the police and the public.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And at this point, we'll excuse Minister Blair and go on to Mr. Van Popta. 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Minister Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Commissioner Lucky, good to see you. Thank you for being here. This is a very important discussion that we're having today. The minister was asked on a couple of occasions about possible criminal prosecutions, and he pointed out that elected politicians don't do prosecutions, and of course I agree with that. But Commissioner Lucky, what is your opinion on that? Would this be appropriate for an appropriate situation for appointing a special prosecutor if the witnesses that Mr. Justice Bastarache and the other investigators is to be believed, there was criminal activity, and I think, you know, for the sake of public confidence in our national police force, that needs to be taken seriously. So, what do you say about that? Special prosecutor, is this an appropriate case for that?
Thank you for that question. The first thing I will say is there is no tolerance in my organization for that behavior, period, full stop. But what the conditions under which Justice Bastarache did his went through the process, it was full confidentiality. So I have, unfortunately, and I've talked about this when it came out, I have no idea to know who the offenders are unless the survivors of that activity come forward. and it's unfortunate. But if that behavior shows itself now, absolutely, we're dealing with that, and we lay charges on in those instances. And we can't. The thing is, we can't deconflict with what Justice Bastarash said, and figure out who those offenders are, because it was all done in confidentiality. So I really do want this one message I want loud and clear is I need the women to speak out. We're listening. We are creating a process that will, we're taking this seriously, and that's what the ICHR is about, where they can come forward. But if it's criminal, absolutely, it's paramount that they come forward, and it will be investigated.
Well, thank you for that. I find it a little hard to believe that you don't have reasonable and probable grounds for having an investigation. Mr. Justice Bastarash said in his report that it was an open secret, not just in the last 6 months or a couple of years, but going back many, many years, that there was sexual harassment going on. This never would have stood in the private sector. Something would have happened. So what do you say about that?
We don't know what we don't know, unfortunately. Like if these complaints are not brought forward, unfortunately, if they can be brought forward, they don't have to be brought forward by the person who is the victim of those complaints. They can be brought forward in any form, and we will do a fulsome investigation if it's an internal process. If it's criminal, we will seek outside resources to do a criminal investigation, and we will bring that to the court. When you talk about special prosecutors, we don't need special prosecutors because it's the court. It's criminal code offense. It'll be brought to the Canadian courts, and charges will be laid, and people will be held to account if the evidence is there.
I have a question about the report itself. When I read it, I was shocked, as I'm sure many Canadians were, how pervasive sexual discrimination and abuse is in the RCMP. But as Mr. Justice Bastarash said, it was not new. It's been going on for many years. And Commissioner Lucky, and I have a great deal of respect for you and your career. But as a person having been in the RCMP or in police services for so many years, were you shocked by what that report said?
Oh my goodness. Absolutely, I was shocked. I can't, everybody has a journey. I've had a journey. And it was so difficult to see what some people had to go through and how long it took for their concerns to be heard. When I talked to Linda Davidson before the report came out, and she said, I love the RCMP, but nobody would listen. That tore my heart. I vowed that would never happen again, ever, not under my watch anyways. And
good.
That's exactly why I was brought in.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. So I think we're all shocked. But are you confident that that the initiatives that you are now starting are going to be effective in restoring the public's confidence and pride, if I might add that, into the RCMP? I was brought up to be very proud of my RCMP, and this report was not only shocking but very disappointing.
We're going to have to unfortunately save the answer to that good question to the next rounds. With that, Madame Lambropoulos, 5 minutes, please.
My apologies. I didn't realize it was my turn. Thank you, Commissioner Lucky, for being here with us today. I know this must not be easy to reconfront something that was already shocking to everybody. I can't imagine how it must have felt for you, who's heading the organization or who's the commissioner of the RCMP. So I guess I'm a little bit newer with regards to this. I did read the Bastarash report, and I was able to ask him questions when he came to committee. But with regards to how complaints work, the way that I understand them to work is that the RCMP investigates the complaints themselves. Who does it go to, the complaint? Who receives the complaint once someone comes forward?
Thank you for that question. If you're speaking specifically to the harassment complaints, the ICHR has been set up as a separate entity. Any other complaints outside the harassment process goes through our code of conduct process. And of course, criminal complaints go a whole different route. But specifically with harassment, what we've done with the ICHR is brought it out of the chain of command. We've brought in external investigators. The external investigators aren't part of the RCMP. They've been procured through government processes. They will do the complete investigation. They will come to a conclusion, and then the conclusion will be, once a conclusion is made, it will be brought back to a conduct authority outside the chain of command to, if there is in fact discipline to be dealt with. If there is not discipline to be dealt with, obviously we try to deal with things at the lowest level through a referral to an informal conflict management program, if we can do that. But if not, then it goes through that whole investigation. It's important that this process is obviously accessible, timely, and supports that accountability. The biggest part about it as well is the restoration of the workplace. So in the initial instances, we may in fact move people out of their workplace because people who have allegations of this behavior, we may have to move them out of the workplace to restore the workplace to make sure it's safe. And that's kind of the process that we have. Like in general terms, I could pass it over to Mr. Stringer, our Chief Administrative Officer, who is instrumental in creating this process with our Management Advisory Board, if you need more information.
Thank you. Perhaps before we go on to Mr. Stringer, I have a second question, and afterwards, Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Stringer can chime in as well. With regards to, well, first of all, it seems that not many people came forward, as you said yourself, until it was completely confidential and it was someone on the outside doing this investigation. A lot of the women made reference to the fact that they didn't feel they could come forward because they would be punished if they were to come forward. They felt that the people who were doing the harassing were actually getting rewarded and that it was some sort of clique, an all boys club type of thing. What concretely is being done to counter this? I mean, you spoke a lot about the culture and the things that you're doing at the top in order to change things, so that once you're gone, the next person who takes your seats can continue the change, and so that it can stay. Obviously, we want the change to stay once it happens. But what concretely is being done in order to make people feel comfortable and feel like they can go forward and feel like they aren't going to be punished for coming forward? How can you entice and encourage women to come forward if they're afraid that their career is in jeopardy, or if they're afraid that that no one's going to be on their side?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. First of all, the RCMP prohibits acts of reprisal or retaliation, and employees who engage in retaliation against a complainant, a respondent, a witness, an investigator, or even a decision maker will be subject to disciplinary or conduct measures up to and including dismissal. So we take it really seriously. And the new ICHR process has clear and accessible information on the policies, and we accept the reports of reprisal to be resolved according to the Canada Labour Code regulations. We have to also look at education, prevention, awareness, promote employee trust, of course, that's important. And we have to make sure that this process is fair, people are taken seriously, and that they will not fear any reprisal.
Thank you, Madame Lambropoulos. With that, we complete the second round. We're starting the third round. Mr. Couric, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the commissioner and the witnesses coming to the committee today. Commissioner, I found my colleague Mr. Van Popte's question very, very poignant, and certainly as one notable part of the report, I read about how within the musical ride there was just grievous a grievous culture of sexual assault, and I remember fondly some of my childhood going and being excited about the horses and a significant amount of Canadian pride represented there, and that's a massive challenge. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to conclude or to answer Mr. Van Popta's question about, are the measures being taken thus far that you've described in part, the minister has described other aspects of it, is that enough to restore accountability, to give justice for the victims, and to ensure that Canadians can have pride in the RCMP?
Thank you for that. There is no one measure that's going to be a panacea. And when I was describing at one committee about training, it's not just about training. A course is not going to change our culture, nor is one event, but it's a series of events, and it's building that foundation. So first of all, getting the right people in the door, making sure they have the right character, testing for bias and anti-racist behavior. Then bringing them into our organization, training them, teaching them the core values, training them on the consequences of not adhering to the core values, firming those up through a cadet field coaching program, and then an entire suite of leadership training, leadership development, and not only for supervisors, but also for them to be able to hold others to account. So there's that, policies and procedures, changing those, and then using the external expertise. So there's a whole suite of foundational pieces.
Okay. Thank you very much, Commissioner. So I appreciate that. And if I could, because of course we have very limited time within committee, would it be possible for you to table with the committee some of those documents, some of the recruitment mechanisms that you've referenced? Certainly, I'd be very curious as to see what that looks like, and I'm sure others on the committee would as well, and just some of the other measures that you're talking about so that members of the committee could see that. I found it quite astounding, quite frankly, that the minister did talk quite a bit about, the future, and I understand that's certainly the way that policy is affected. But to your knowledge, have there been any terminations resulting from sexual misconduct in the RCMP from the actions that are outlined in the Bastarache report?
Specifically, I can't tie that specifically to the Bastarache report because I don't know who those people are. And I know that one of...
So if I could broaden that then, in the last 7 months or so, have there been any investigations initiated, charges laid against members of the RCMP for sexual misconduct?
Yes, there has. For some of our statistics, for example, if I go to 2019, when I talk about sexual misconduct files, there was 50 files initiated, and out of those 50, 16 were established. And out of those, we had some voluntary discharges where people resigned or quit the RCMP, and we had in those cases 11 that were dealt with in serious disciplinary measures, which can go from demotion, greater financial penalties, permanent transfer, or dismissal. I do say, though, many people, when it gets to that part of the hearing, there are people who do resign.
Okay. So in terms of RCMP officers or members being found guilty, have there been members that have been found guilty? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. One final question here, as I have a few seconds. How many of Justice Bastarache's recommendations have been fully implemented thus far?
I will get you that number. There are some of them, we've grouped them into themes, but I would say probably approximately, I'm just looking at my numbers here, there has been all of the recommendations have been worked on and implemented in spirit. There's some, for example, I say that because one example is daycares in detachments where that's not possible, but we need to look at measures to provide daycare for parents in the RCMP and women who have children. We need to be able to provide that daycare. It won't be within a detachment for example, but we are
Thank you,
pursuing
thank
all
you,
recommendations.
thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Carrick, rather
Thank you.
than let the commissioners struggle with trying to be more precise, if you could undertake to the committee to give as precise as possible response to Mr. Carrick's question. With that, we'll turn to Madame Kara. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Lucky, for being here. And I know how difficult it is for everyone, I think, to be, talking about this very troubling report. And as I've said before, it is one of the most troubling and shocking reports that I've certainly ever read. And my question was actually my colleague, Mr. Carrick, actually ended his question with that, but that's what I wanted to get at first. Out of the 52 recommendations made by the Bastarache report, how many have been adopted? And if you can also speak to the specific changes you've started to address, this misogynistic, racist, and homophobic toxic culture within the RCMP.
In regards to your first question, we are looking and implementing all recommendations. Some of them not specifically as written by Justice Bastarache, but in other ways, in a more holistic approach, like I said, with, for example, daycare. So there's a full commitment to all recommendations.
Thank you for that. Commissioner, I also wanted to just talk briefly about the existing sanctions regime. I was informed that the conduct measures guide was last updated in 2014. Clearly, much has changed during that time. Can you perhaps expand on how this review be reflected of the developments that have occurred since then?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are actually doing a full review of the conduct measures regime. We are looking at the sanctions. Like you said, they were done in 2014. And what we are doing is we are hiring an external expert in that field to go through and to make sure that it's to today's modernization standards and to make sure that it's in line. But I could pass that over to Mr. Stringer, who that's his area that he's working on.
So thank you for that. Happy to add to that. As the commissioner said, when we saw the recommendations from Justice Bastarache, there were a number of them that spoke to strengthening the sanctions regime. There were a few very specific areas. We did take a look at our conduct measures guidance, and that's where we outlined if this happens, this is the discipline. And we realized, as was pointed out in the question, this was last updated in 2014, and even the language didn't speak to some of the issues that we're facing today. So the view is setting up the ICHR, but at the same time, taking a look at the conduct and the sanctions regime, making sure that looking at what other police organizations are doing, plus other organizations, measuring what we've got against what was in the report from Justice Bastarache, and as the commissioner said, making sure that it meets with the expectations of the public, the commissioner, and employees in 2021 and going forward.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Lucky, I mean, the Bastarache report also found that there were structural inequalities that prevented women and members of the LGBTQ+ community and people from receiving promotion, training, and work assignments on an equal basis with other applicants. I'm sure you would agree that one way to address that is having that diversity at the leadership level. Since the release of the report, have there been any changes made to have that diversity and to have promotions of standing of women and LGBTQ+ individuals within the RCMP?
Absolutely. At the senior level, for example, you see on the screen our Chief Human Resource Officer, Gail Johnson, and our Associate Human Resource Officer who helped create the EDI strategy. Nadine Huggins is here. We have a member of our LGBTQ community who is our Chief Strategic and External Relations Officer. In the RCMP, in the command, we have 15 commanding officers, and I used to say that we had almost 50% were female, but now I can say that we have 60%. There's more females than there is males. When you used to see the senior executive table, it used to be, like I said, white males, police officers. Now you'll see a diversity, but also in the category of employee. They're not all police officers. So we brought in a female chief financial officer. We have brought in Kevin Stringer, who is a civilian, a senior expert civilian. Gail Johnson and Dean Huggins are not police officers either. So we're getting not just diversity in the traditional sense, but diversity of ideas and thoughts. I would really like to pass it to Nadine because she is so good at.
Unfortunately, you left her no
side.
time to be
Excited.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madame Kara. Madame LaRouche, 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, perhaps I could allow Ms. Nadine express herself. You did make some efforts to develop EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusivity. What measures did you take to sort of counter what's been going on by way of discrimination in the last 30 years? Harassment, or misconduct, inappropriate conduct, let's say. What could we have been told about that from Ms. Nadine? Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to take the floor today. Well, I could discuss our strategy with you, which
has spoken a lot about foundations. The EDI strategy that we've developed actually is one of the core bricks in our foundation. Like many institutions across the public service and across Canada, we've been on a path, and now the RCMP has set a place and is building a new foundation for our organization. The EDI strategy is established along 4 pillars. One is around providing the appropriate leadership and governance. A second is to be clear, accountable, and transparent in the tactics that we're putting in place. Thirdly, we're enhancing the education and awareness of our organization from the ground up. And all of these taken together will contribute to the culture change that the Commissioner has been talking about. Ça va changer la culture de GRC.
It's going to change the culture of the RCMP fundamentally. We've had the opportunity to speak with subject matter experts, with external sources, external committees were developed to develop an approach to ensure equity, diversity, and inclusion, and it has really changed the way of doing business. Well, that's very good. Just very quickly, you said to get the right people in the right place. How is this going to contribute to the change of the RCMP?
Je pense que
well, you said have the right people at the right places. Perhaps you'll be able to have the last minutes that I may have left. Why it's so important for the change of culture in the RCMP?
But hopefully you will be able to answer that in another opportunity. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Commissioner Lucky, I'm glad to have an opportunity to speak to you. I have to say I'm a little shocked that you were shocked at Commissioner Bastarash's report. I've had a look at your bio, and you and I are both graduates of the University of Alberta, which is wonderful. I see you have 35 years of experience in the RCMP. You've been decorated with the Order of Military Merit and various other decorations, and a considerably a great career in the RCMP. But, Janet Mirlo's book was written in 2013, and there was other people speaking out at that time, other women speaking out about difficulties in the RC. And I'm just wondering, when Commissioner or when Justice Bastarash says that the toxic culture of misogyny, homophobia, and racism, including sexual violence, and talked about retribution as part of this culture against people coming out against complaints. How could you be shocked if did you miss that along the way? I'm just, it's an honest question. I am just curious about that.
No, and it's a fair question. I was shocked by, I think, the scale of it. I was shocked by the fact that so many women were too scared to come forward, and it took this to come forward. I was shocked by the fact that nobody listened. When I talked to Linda Davidson, it was a game changer for me when she said, if you talk to her, you wouldn't even know that she was one of the survivors. But she just said, you know what, Commissioner, nobody was listening. I was shocked by that because I said, how can that happen? How can people not listen to things like that? That's disgusting. We need to change that. And so how can we make it safe for those people to come forward? And so that's when, it really put fuel in my fire, that report. I knew, we've been working on a lot of things that are already, most of the recommendations in those reports, we've already been working on because the recommendations were not a shock. But it was, what was a shock was some of the stories and the fact that we don't have a mechanism where people feel safe to come forward. So that's why you have my full commitment to that and to making our RCMP the most inclusive and the most diverse we can be, and to make it a place that's welcoming, that allows people to flourish in our organization. So not only will they come to our organization, they will stay and they will flourish and they will not leave because they're dissatisfied, or they will not leave hurt and broken and sad and treated like that. That can't
Thank
happen.
you. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Madame Stubbs, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Still having these issues. Maybe one day I'll figure out how to work all this. Thanks for being here, Commissioner Lucky. I have, I just still want to know about what will be done about the people, the cases identified in Justice Bastrash's work. So here's a question I'm wondering: do you can you foresee, or would you commit to figuring out a way, say that independent body that's going to be, I mean, I guess can't really if it's going to be independent, but whoever is giving input into however this independent body is going to work, can there be some consideration that it be given the power to, retroactively deal with the findings in Bastrash's report, I guess on one hand, and sort of tangentially to that, if you can't comment on that part, is your view that there is like insufficient information or insufficient evidence in Bastrash's report to launch an internal investigation in the RCMP, particularly with regard to these 15 repeat offenders? I mean, I think that's literally the business of the police on a daily basis, to identify repeat offenders. So I just think I'm quite concerned about. I'm very glad to hear about the work going forward and look forward to ongoing reporting about that. But I'm still concerned about doing justice for those people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm absolutely concerned as well. And I noticed one person spoke about the investigations in the Bastarash. There was no investigation. These were testimonies. Some were handwritten and submitted. And when they got to a higher level, there were interviews, but they weren't your classic interview that we would do for evidence. They were determining the level of harm that the person experienced. It wasn't evidentiary. So, and besides that, all of those interviews and any paper documents have been destroyed. That was part of the agreement, and it was completely confidential. So we don't know who came forward. They were all numbered, and it was under lock and key. So to be able to follow up on that is impossible. And that's why internally we've asked people to come forward. We've asked people to come. There's been some of my internal broadcasts have been put on Facebook for some of the females to see with the help of Linda Davidson. There's been talk also since the last time I spoke about Bastarash. So the only thing I can do is to call on people to come forward. And if it is anything criminal has happened to them, please come forward to your police of jurisdiction. If you don't even have to come to the RCMP, go to the police of jurisdiction. If you need help, you need support, come to us. We will give you that help. We will give you that support. And I have had people come forward with events, but they haven't been part of the Merlot-Davidson settlement, just separate ones. And they've now had the courage to come forward because they are seeing action and they're seeing a process that will be able to deal with them and something that we're taking seriously. So absolutely. I wish I could say, you know, we did do a scrub down when we heard that when Justice Bastarash testified and said that there was repeat offenders. We did a scrub down of our entire processes of anybody who had been in the system. But of course, if he is referring to people that have done not so good, have done bad behavior, and it hasn't been reported or investigated or put through any process, then we don't have it. We've only did the scrub down of the ones that were in the system.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I wish you and the RCMP well. I believe you that you're sincere about making this change. I hope you receive the political support, the resource, and the will that you need to get that done in this institution. I certainly have family members and friends who are both administrative support and RCMP officers within the institution. And I think it's important for all Canadians. Chair, at this time, I'm just going to move a motion because I know that all of us here on this committee share our shock and our outrage. But I know that
can we hold that motion until we finish with Madame Damoff, and then I'll open up the floor to you to move that motion?
Yeah, here's what I'm wondering. Could I move it now, and then we can proceed with additional questions on behalf of the members and come back to it, or would we come back to me right after before we move into our
my thought
in-camera?
would just to maintain some level of order would be that we finish with Ms. Damoff, you move your motion, and then presumably there'll be some debate that would follow from that. I just take note that we are eating into the time that we have available with the commissioner.
Okay.
So
Sure, Chair, if I can do that before we move into any in-camera meeting at the end of it, that's perfectly fine with me.
Madame Damoff, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, we haven't talked a lot about depot, and that's one of the things that was also in the Bastarash report, that the toxic culture actually started at depot, and as a result, the folks that join the RCMP get trained in this toxic culture right from day one. So a couple of questions. What are you doing to change the culture at depot? And also, is the Independent Center for Harassment Resolution, will that be available to recruits who are doing the training at depot? You're on mute, Commissioner.
Yeah, sorry. I'm glad you asked that question because depot is a regular member's first experience of the RCMP, and it's where our culture does in fact start. So when recruits learn at depot and how they learn it will impact them as a police officer, and we need to get that right, absolutely. And so we started off, we have a new chief learning officer that has been appointed to strengthen the national standards and the coordination and the oversight for the RCMP learning, including the depot modernization. And that chief learning officer has been mandated to work with experts and conduct what we call a full level 3 evaluation of the cadet training program. And that's to ensure that the curriculum is reflecting the needs in the field, but it will also include that GBA plus lens that we like to use and ensure the content is inclusive, it doesn't intentionally reinforce stereotypes, and it reflects modern reality. And so we do have plans as well, because we're very lucky in Regina. We have the First Nations University of Canada, and they are right there in Regina. So we're partnering with them and to review all the Indigenous content and the cultural awareness curriculum. But we also, when we do anything with like gender-based violence, missing and murdered women, anything Indigenous, we always bring outside experts in to actually present the material so that people get a better sense of how the people are impacted by what police do each and every day. We're also working to assess that paramilitary aspect that we spoke about, and we're ensuring that that we can look at some of the paramilitary parts. If there is parts that promote pride or team building, we'll look at those and keep those. But if they're not promoting things that are conducive to our core values, then we will not keep them in our curriculum. We also, to answer your question about the ICHR, yes, in fact, the cadets will be able to report complaints. I'd like to throw it over to Gail Johnson because she's actually the person in charge of our training academy, and she's done a lot of work on that.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members. So yes, with respect to DEPO, we have a lot of work underway. We are examining the culture of DEPO from a number of aspects. The Commissioner has mentioned the paramilitary nature of the organization. We did have a evaluation or assessment done by our evaluation group to look at the paramilitary nature of DEPO, to look at it to see if it had an impact on the culture of the organization and the work that we need to do to make sure we have a modern and inclusive training academy. So the review has been is under review right now because we've received the preliminary findings, and in the meantime we're continuing to look at we're looking at the report, but in the meantime we're looking at the total number of hours that is spent on the paramilitary aspects of activities at DEPO, and we want to make sure that we have an optimal balance between that and the other cadet training elements. We're also developing an approach so that we clearly communicate the purpose and the desired outcomes of all paramilitary activities to ensure cadets understand how the skills...
I have another quick question for the Commissioner, so I'm going to stop you there because my time's almost up, because I want to follow up on something that Ms. Stubbs asked. Commissioner, will the independent center be able to investigate on behalf of these women from the past? Would they be able to file complaints through there?
Yes, the independent center will deal with the harassment complaints. If
But
it is,
only current, though? Say someone
no.
has left the RCMP, would they be able to go there? Or could you think about that? Because I think there's still a fear of coming. If someone was an RCMP officer, some way, and I think that's what Shannon was getting at, some way for these women to have a place to come forward. I think what you're doing moving forward is great, but for the women and LGBTQ2 who are survivors of sexual violence and assault, if there was a way for them to have a process. So perhaps you can think about that, Commissioner.
Well, if it is criminal, it doesn't need to, there is no prescribed time, and it doesn't have to come back into the organization. If it's sexual assault or any type of behavior like that, that would go to the police of jurisdiction, and it would there is no timeline on that.
Okay. But sometimes people need support to come forward. Okay, sorry, Chair.
Well, before, thank you, Madame Demop. Before I turn it over to Ms. Stubbs for her motion, the chair has a reflective concern based upon Justice Bastarash's report. We paid out $125 million. I don't know whether that's out of the RCMP's budget or whether it's out of public safety budget, but one way or another, it's the taxpayers of Canada paid out $125 million on 3,000 plus claims. The commissioner of the RCMP has no idea to whom the money was paid, has no idea whether the whether the perpetrators, whether they're at a level of criminality or less than criminality, are still in the midst of the force, and all documents have been destroyed, and there's no real possibility of any quote unquote justice in the criminal code sense of the word coming out of this situation, absent the initiative of those who are the victims. Do you see that as a very poor state of affairs?
I see that was the cards that was dealt when we deal with civil litigation, which isn't, what would I call it, remedial, or isn't forward leaning that way. It is simply a reimbursement for harm that has been caused. And the great thing of the silver lining on this is the report for me, getting at least some of the ideas. They weren't, the recommendations weren't surprising, but they reinforced what we needed to do. There was some things that came forward that were, we weren't specifically focused on that we are now focused on. But it really gave the survivors a voice. And that was why it was so confidential, because I believe, it was interesting. I thought to myself, I gave Justice Bastrash the opportunity. I asked him through the lawyers, of course, if he was going to do a draft report and we could respond to it so that we could give him some context on some of the issues. And he absolutely forbid that. But I couldn't understand why, because all the different kinds of reviews that we get through audit committees always do that. And I understand now, because if he had refuted some of the voices by some of the information I gave him, then that wouldn't have given them their voice. And that was what this activity or this lawsuit was about, is giving those members a voice. And it came out loud and clear again when I talked to Linda Davidson about how she finally had a voice and she was finally able to tell her story and hope that it would result in changes in the organization.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
don't
where I come
take
in.
I don't take issue with a process for giving these claimants a voice. What I take issue with is that there seems to be little or no consequence, except for the taxpayers of Canada that have to put up $125 million, and all we've got at this point is initiatives to go forward, which everyone on this committee would applaud. But the consequences for the perpetrators seem to be exceedingly modest. So I'll leave it there. But I just, having listened to an hour and a half worth of testimony, I had to express myself.
Chair, if I may, I want to thank you for expressing that, Chair, because I think that's the frustration of many Canadians who have read this report and understand where we're at. Well, yes, the victims need a voice, and I agree with that. But we still have the potential and the possibility that there are continued victims currently going on in the RCMP because those perpetrators remain in the RCMP, and in some cases, as the report has indicated, are serial in nature. And as Mr. Harris has mentioned and others have mentioned, and you as well, Commissioner, there has to be a way, besides your internal memos to your members, there has to be a way where we can rid this the scar, and as those who are responsible can be held responsible in some way. We won't get all of them, and I appreciate the evidence threshold is totally different in this context as opposed to the report that he put together. But I would encourage you to do everything as the chair has indicated moving forward so that those responsible for these actions are held accountable, and that any further ones that come together under the new process are given the full extent of the law. And I face those measures. Thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you. With that, I'm assuming from Madam Stubbs that we can release the commissioner in order for you to move your motion. So thank you for coming before the committee. I can only imagine that this has been difficult for you, but it's been exceedingly difficult for many others as well. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for the opportunity to, to show that we are committed to making that change, and we're not going to let you down.
Thank you. So with that, we'll release the commissioner and her colleagues and move to Madame Stubbs. taking into account that we also have set aside 15 minutes in camera for some conversation. So with that, Shannon.
I'll speak at my usual rapid fire pace that causes such grief for the poor interpreters. Yeah, just to end on that note, actually, thanks Chair Pam and Glenn for the questions and the summary that you just made there at the end. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. I'm totally mind boggled at this. I have no doubt that each and every one of us, regardless of our, party affiliation, wants to see actual action on this and actual consequences. I think all of us still are deeply concerned about what will happen in terms of justice for the victims and consequences for the perpetrators. That was captured bastard. Anyway, I'll get
Shannon. I know you're speaking very rapidly, and you can probably cover in 2 minutes what the rest of us would take 20. But we do have a hard stop at 6:30. That's entirely
okay. I'll move
my
this
fault.
motion.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. So here's my motion, which I'm thinking and hoping we'll all support and get this done, so we can just get some action and reporting back to Parliament and to Canadians on these issues. I move that the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, in response to the Merlo-Davidson Settlement Report, the Bastrash Report, titled Broken Dreams, Broken Lives by retired Justice Michelle Bastrash, considers the response of the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to be insufficient given the seriousness of criminal activities and sexual misconduct in the RCMP. And since this action is detrimental to the integrity of our national law enforcement service, the communities they serve, and the integrity of our criminal justice system, the committee, 1, adopt and submit the Bastrash Report and its recommendations as a report to the House. 2, report to the House its recommendation that the government withhold all performance pay and bonuses for executives and managers at both the RCMP and Public Safety Canada until the executives and managers implement the Bastrash Report recommendations that fall within their authority. 3, calls upon the Commissioner of the RCMP to provide a detailed report to the committee before June 23rd, 2021 on all ongoing actions and planning to implement the recommendations of the Bastrash Report, including timelines for implementation and ongoing work to meet the recommendations, and further calls for this report to be updated and provided to the committee by the last Friday of each month until the committee is satisfied that the RCMP has met its obligations. 4, encourages the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness not to interfere or tamper with the reports referred to in subsection 3, but be provided a copy at the appropriate time by the Commissioner. And 5, direct the Chair to call a meeting of the committee on the Bastrash Report if any updates requested in subsection 3 are not provided on time.
Okay, the motion is in order, even though there's not 48 hours notice, because it arises out of the business of the committee. We are down to 3 minutes. Hardly gives any opportunity to discuss the report. But I, first of all, I think I'm not quite sure whether I saw Pam's hand up first, and then I think Adrian's.
I was second.
Were you second? So Adrian first. Madame Larouche.
Oui, est-ce que ce serait possible d'avoir évidemment la version écrite?
Would it be possible to have?
Would it be possible to get a written copy of that in French as well?
It's just not. It's moved verbally, so. I'm assuming you do have a French copy, Shannon? Yes, the answer is yes. Pam?
Thanks, Chair. I think we were all report, but also I think the end of the meeting saw the cooperation and the ways that all parties want to move forward on this. I mean, having Shannon read it and not having a chance to digest it, I would move, given it's 6:29, Chair, that we adjourn, and then the motion can be distributed to all of us.
Okay, that's probably a motion that is in order, non-debatable, and I don't think we actually have that much choice since our resources end at 6:30. So is there any wish to debate? Sorry, is there any wish to vote on this, or we just accept it as is? Okay. I think it's as is. It's a dilatory. Well, that we discussed this. We put this off to a further date.
Well, I don't think we can do much more if we have a hard stop. I believe that Shannon and her exuberance has used up whatever time there was and taken us a little bit by surprise with the detail. So I guess we do have to think about it.
Okay. We have a meeting on Monday and possibly, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll try and figure out where to put it on the agenda, because it does affect other things that we've got in play. So with that, unfortunately, we have to adjourn. And unless my clerk says something to the contrary, I see nothing. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.